What if I told you that in 1947, a 7-year-old girl in rural Vermont began drawing faces that didn't exist yet? What if those same faces started appearing in the world 20 years later, belonging to people who had no connection to her whatsoever? And what if the final portrait she ever drew was of her own death? This is the story of Eleanor Whitmore, a child whose artistic gift transcended the boundaries of time itself, and the terrifying legacy she left behind in a collection of notebooks that authorities tried to destroy, but COULDN. Single quotes T. Eleanor was born on October 13, 1940, in the small town of Millbrook, Vermont, to parents who ran the local funeral home. From the moment she could hold a pencil, Eleanor was drawing. But unlike other children who drew stick figures and rainbows, Eleanor drew faces. Detailed, haunting faces of people no one had ever seen. Her mother, Margaret Whitmore, first noticed something unusual when Eleanor was just 4 years old. The child would sit for hours, completely absorbed in her sketchbook, creating portrait after portrait with a precision that seemed impossible for someone so young. When Margaret asked Eleanor who these people were, the little girl would simply say, "They're not here yet, but they will be." At first, the family assumed it was typical childhood imagination. Children often create imaginary friends and elaborate fantasy worlds. But Eleanor's drawings were different. They possessed a photographic quality, capturing not just facial features, but expressions, emotions, even what appeared to be personality traits embedded in the eyes and the curve of the mouth. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the town's only physician, examined Eleanor in 1946 after her parents became concerned about her obsessive drawing habits. She would sometimes draw for 12 hours straight, stopping only when her hand cramped so severely she couldn't hold the pencil. Dr. Hartwell noted in his records that the child showed signs of what he called artistic possession, a term he invented to describe her trance-like state while drawing. But the real mystery began in 1967, exactly 20 years after Eleanor's most productive period. A photographer named James Morrison was documenting faces for a project called American Portraits when he stumbled upon Eleanor's notebooks in an estate sale. The previous owner had died, and among the items being sold were 17 notebooks filled with Eleanor's drawings. Morrison bought the notebooks out of curiosity, impressed by the artistic skill displayed by what he assumed was a professional artist. It wasn't until he returned home and began studying the portraits that he noticed something impossible. 3 of the faces Eleanor had drawn looked exactly like people he had photographed in the past year. Not similar, identical. Convinced it was coincidence, Morrison began a systematic comparison of Eleanor's drawings with his photograph collection. Within 6 months, he had identified 43 perfect matches. People Eleanor had drawn as a child were walking around as adults in 1967, living lives that began years after she had captured their faces on paper. Morrison contacted Margaret Whitmore, who was still alive and living in the same house in Millbrook. When he showed her the photographs matched with her daughter's drawings, Margaret broke down completely. She confessed that Eleanor's gift had terrified the family, and they had hoped that by never speaking of it, the whole matter would simply disappear into history. According to Margaret, Eleanor's drawings had become increasingly disturbing as she grew older. The faces she drew began showing signs of trauma, illness, and profound sadness. In 1948, when Eleanor was 8 years old, she drew a portrait of a man with distinctive scars on his face and told her mother, "This one is going to be very sad. He doesn't know about the fire yet." 3 weeks later, a house fire in the next town over left a local blacksmith named Thomas Reed with facial scars identical to those in Eleanor's drawing. Reed had been born in 1943, making him 5 years old when Eleanor drew his adult face, complete with scars he wouldn't receive for another 5 years. The most chilling discovery came when Morrison found Eleanor's final notebook, which had been kept separate from the others. This notebook contained only 13 drawings, all dated between October and December of 1952. The first 12 were portraits of children, each more disturbing than the last. Their faces showed signs of illness, pain, and a knowledge of suffering that no child should possess. The 13th and final drawing was a portrait. Eleanor had drawn herself as she would appear at age 12, lying in a hospital bed, her face gaunt, and her eyes holding a terrible awareness. At the bottom of the page, in her careful handwriting, she had written, December 21st, 1952. The pictures will stop now. Eleanor Whitmore died of acute leukemia on December 21st, 1952, exactly as she had predicted. The hospital photograph taken the day before her death matched her final self-portrait perfectly, down to the angle of her head on the pillow and the specific way the hospital gown fell across her shoulders. But the story doesn't end with Eleanor's death. Morrison's investigation revealed that all 12 children Eleanor had drawn in her final notebook died within the following year, each from different causes, but all showing the same signs of premature awareness that Eleanor had captured in their portraits. Sarah Chen, a medical researcher who studied Morrison's findings in 1973, proposed that Eleanor might have been what she termed a temporal artist, someone whose consciousness could somehow access visual information from the future. Chen's research was cut short when she died in a car accident, but her notes suggested that Eleanor's drawings might have been more than predictions, they might have been a form of temporal documentation. The most disturbing aspect of Eleanor's gift emerged when Morrison began tracking down the living subjects of her portraits. Without exception, every person he interviewed reported having vivid recurring dreams throughout their childhood of a little girl drawing their picture. They described the same girl, pale, with dark hair and intense eyes, always sitting at a small wooden desk by a window. None of these people had ever been to Vermont. Most had never even heard of Millbrook. Yet they all described the same room, the same desk, and the same feeling of being watched and documented by someone who seemed to know them better than they knew themselves. Dr. Patricia Vance, a psychiatrist, who interviewed 15 of Eleanor's subjects in the 1980s, noted that they all shared similar psychological profiles. They tended to be highly sensitive individuals who reported feeling displaced in time, as if they were living lives that had been predetermined by someone else. Several had become artists themselves, though none possessed Eleanor's prophetic abilities. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery was made by Eleanor's subjects themselves. As they aged, they began to resemble Eleanor's drawings more and more precisely. Not just in facial features, but in expression, in the way they held their heads, in the subtle details of their appearance that Eleanor had somehow captured decades before these people were even born. Margaret Whitmore died in 1975, but before her death, she revealed the final piece of Eleanor's puzzle. Hidden in the basement of the funeral home was an 18th notebook, one that Eleanor had worked on in secret during her final months. This notebook contained portraits of people who wouldn't be born until the 21st century. Morrison, who was in his 70s by then, made the decision to seal this notebook and donate it to a private collection with instructions that it not be opened until the year 2000. He died in 1989, taking the location of the notebook to his grave. In 2001, researchers at the Burlington Historical Society announced that they had located Morrison's sealed collection. But when they opened the container that was supposed to hold Eleanor's final notebook, they found only ashes and a note in Morrison's handwriting. Some futures are not meant to be seen. The official explanation was that the notebook had deteriorated over time. But 3 researchers involved in opening the container reported that the ashes were still warm and smelled of recently burned paper. Security footage from that day showed the container being opened in an empty room with no possible source of fire. Today, 16 of Eleanor's original notebooks remain in private collections around the world. Collectors report that new faces occasionally appear on pages that were previously blank, and that existing drawings sometimes change subtly over time, as if updating themselves to reflect the current appearance of their subjects. Eleanor Whitmore died 71 years ago, but her gift continues to manifest in ways that defy explanation. In 2018, an art student at Yale University named David Park discovered that he could perfectly recreate Eleanor's drawing style, despite never having seen her work. When Park drew a self-portrait using Eleanor's technique, he found that he had unconsciously depicted himself as he would appear. In 10 years, complete with a surgical scar he wouldn't receive until a car accident in 2023. The question that haunts researchers to this day is not how Eleanor could see the future, but why. What purpose did her gift serve? Was she documenting inevitability, or was she somehow causing the futures she drew to come into existence? Dr. Michael Torres, who has spent 40 years studying Eleanor's case, believes that she was what he calls a temporal anchor, a person whose consciousness exists partially outside of linear time. According to his theory, Eleanor didn't predict the future, she experienced all time simultaneously. And her drawings were her attempt to communicate what she saw to the rest of us, trapped as we are in the present moment. The most chilling evidence for this theory comes from Eleanor's own words, recorded by her mother in a diary that wasn't discovered until 2015. In one entry, Margaret wrote, "Eleanor told me today that time isn't like a river flowing forward. She said it's like a house with many rooms, and she can see into all of them at once. She said the people in the rooms don't know they're in a house, they think each room is the whole world. But Eleanor can see the doors between the rooms. And sometimes she draws pictures of what she sees, to help the people understand that there are other rooms waiting for them." If Eleanor was indeed seeing all of time simultaneously, then her drawings weren't predictions, they were portraits of eternal beings, whose existence transcends our limited perception of past, present, and future. We see ourselves as moving through time, but Eleanor saw time moving through us, and she drew us as we truly are. Timeless faces wearing temporary expressions, eternal souls playing temporary roles. The legacy of Eleanor Whitmore forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of reality itself. If the future already exists in some form, what does that mean for free will? If Eleanor could see our faces before we were born, what else was predetermined? And if there are others like her, other temporal anchors scattered throughout history, what else do they see that we cannot? Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that Eleanor's gift wasn't unique, but simply the most documented case of something that occurs more often than we realize. How many artists throughout history have drawn faces that wouldn't exist for decades? How many prophets have described events with impossible accuracy? How many children have shown knowledge they shouldn't possess, only to have their gifts dismissed as imagination or coincidence? Eleanor Whitmore's story reminds us that our understanding of time, consciousness, and reality itself may be far more limited than we dare to admit. She was a child who could draw people before they were born, but perhaps she was also something else, a window into a universe far stranger and more interconnected than we can comprehend. The notebooks that survive contain over 800 portraits, and researchers estimate that only 60% of Eleanor's subjects have been identified. The rest remain mysteries, faces waiting to emerge into the world, or perhaps already walking among us, unaware that a little girl in Vermont drew their portrait 70 years ago. Eleanor Whitmore died at age 12, but her vision spans centuries. She saw your face before you were born, captured your expression before you learned to make it, and knew your story before you lived it. The question isn't whether Eleanor could see the future. The question is, what else did she see, and why? Weren't we ready to understand it? In the end, Eleanor Whitmore's gift wasn't drawing, it was seeing. She saw through the illusion of time that keeps us trapped in the present moment. And she tried to show us that we are all connected across centuries, that our faces are eternal, and that somewhere, in a place beyond time, a little girl is still drawing, still seeing, still documenting the beautiful and terrible truth that we exist in all moments. Simultaneously, her notebooks are more than art, they are evidence that reality is far stranger than we ever imagined, and that sometimes, the most profound truths come from the most innocent sources. Eleanor Whitmore was just a child, but she saw what the wisest philosophers and scientists are only beginning to understand, that time is not a river, but a house with many rooms, and we are all residents in that house, whether we know it or not.